Quiet, please.
Ladies and gentlemen.
You ready for the big show?
In exactly 15 seconds, we'll be on the air.
Lars.
This is the Lars Larson Show.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Honestly provocative talk with Lars Larson.
I keep forgetting I'm president.
Broadcasting across the Pacific Northwest and covering Oregon, Washington, and Idaho on the Radio Northwest Network.
Lars.
And now,
Then we're going to kick the Biden crime family out of the White House.
here's your host,
This MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history.
Lars Larson.
Welcome back to Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to get to your phone calls and emails. It is honestly provocative talk, and I'm glad to have you be part of that conversation. If you want to dial in, it's 866. Well, how I got into it was 47 years ago. I started in radio when I was 16 years old. I was still in high school. I was doing speech and debate. I was thinking about being a lawyer, maybe. Thank God I didn't go that direction. And we were offered an opportunity to be interns, three of us. And I took the internship for 3 months and worked at the local radio station, the mighty 1590 KTIL. And at the end of it, they sent the other two interns back and they said, would you like a job? And I took a job at 16. I was making $1.85 an hour. That was the federal minimum wage back then. And I was working 10 to midnight, Monday through Friday on the radio station. And I was working Saturdays and Sundays. And when they had somebody gone and I could do it, like morning drive, I would come in and fill in doing morning drive. So news and all that for all the farmers and the dairy farmers in Tillamook. And after that, I became a reporter, worked out of the last 47 years, I think 1 year I didn't work in radio at all. And the rest of the time, I always had a job in radio, even when I had a full-time job in TV. So 25 years ago, I got the offer. I'd been filling in on KXL for about 3 years for Bill Gallagher. When he was sick, when he was on vacation, I would come and fill in. And KXL got the opportunity. They knew that they were going to lose Rush Limbaugh to the competition. And they said, we need to have somebody to replace him. And they ended up hiring me, planning that I would start in 90 days. Instead, I was asked to start the following week because the guy who used to occupy my time slot walked in and quit. And not because of me, but because he was offered another job. So they called, I'd made the deal on a Friday. I was supposed to go to work in 90 days. I got a call on Monday night saying, hey, Bill just quit. Can you start tomorrow? And I did. And have been doing the talk show since 1997. So it's now been 25 years. And then about 3 years into that, we started the Radio Northwest Network, which now encompasses, I think, 23 stations around Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. That was in the year 2000. Then in 2003, I got the opportunity to take over a national show. Now, I'd told people for a long time, they'd said, are you ever going to go national? I said, I don't see it because I don't foresee the time where I could do this show, which I love the most. Honestly, I do love my Northwest show much more than the national show. Not that I don't put the same amount of effort into both, but I didn't see that there was going to be an opportunity to do both. It happened that it fit. And so from 2003 to present, I've been doing the national radio show. And people sometimes get confused about that. They say, well, hold on, which show is which? I said, well, from noon to 3 on KXL is the Northwest show and on all those stations around the 3 states. And then from 3 to 6 p.m. is the national show. KXL happens to air me from noon to 4, so they air 1 hour of the national show. So that's how it all got started. And I came to it, and I call it talk journalism. And people say, well, people with opinions aren't journalists. And I said, well, H.L. Mencken, who was a famous American journalist, would have disagreed. Mark Twain, who was a famous American journalist, would have disagreed. They all wrote opinion. And Walter Cronkite even would have disagreed because he did a commentary every day with his opinion that he was doing the TV news and keeping his opinion out. Well, maybe not as successfully as he should have, but he was supposedly just doing the news and keeping his opinion to himself. So I try to bring the same things that I brought as a reporter to this job, and that means talk about the issues of the day, build every day's show from the news of the day, and then apply the same rules, which is don't ever go on the air and say something you don't believe to be true and can back up, and when you find out you've made a mistake, and doing 6 hours of live radio every day, I make mistakes every day, correct them just as quickly as you possibly can. And I'm happy to do that. And of course, one of my first producers thought I was crazy when I said, naysayers go to the head of the line, because on a lot of talk shows, anybody who disagrees with the host gets screened out. The call screener doesn't let them go on. I made it a hallmark of my show that I wanted to hear the people who would say, you're full of it. You know, Joe Biden's the greatest president and taxes are the way to prosperity. Or he really did a great job getting us out of Afghanistan. He only got 13 service members killed and left thousands of Americans behind. The idea is, if I hear from the naysayer and my audience gets to hear their point of view, my point of view, and the facts, and then I think my audience is smart enough to make up their own mind about what they think is true. I don't ever say, I'm going to tell you something and you should take it as brought down from heaven or carved on stone tablets. That's not me. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you why I think it, how I got to that position, what backs it up. And then I invite the people who would try to pick apart my argument to make their best effort. I enjoyed doing radio because one of the reasons I liked the idea of being a lawyer is you think, well, you go into court all the time. Well, lawyers don't go into court all the time. They spend a lot of time doing nothing but research and writing documents and briefs and all that. I decided that what I liked about journalism, being a disc jockey gets boring very quickly, playing the same songs over and over again and doing the time and the temperature and that sort of thing. And I did news back then. I read Rip and Read news when we literally did rip it off the teletype and it came down the wire, because it used to come to the radio station on a pair of copper wires and not from a satellite in the sky. But what I liked about it best was I got to gather interesting stuff and then deliver that information to an audience. And you know that as a reporter, you keep your opinion out of it. So I always had opinions about the things I covered, but I was very careful to keep them out. When I worked at Channel 12, I was the managing editor. My job was to take opinion out of stories, among other things, and say to reporters, who said this? And they said, well, everybody knows that. And I say, everybody knows that is not a standard. The standard is either somebody said it, a mayor, a governor, a legislator, or you're saying it, and you aren't allowed to put your opinion in the story. So I took a lot of opinion out of stories, and I kept my own opinion out of stories. I love the idea, though, of gathering interesting information and then presenting it to my audience so they get a chance to hear what's going on. And talk is a lot of fun because, no disrespect to people like you, Jim, in news, but news has to cover everything. House fires, city council zoning meetings and things like that. My job now is to take the things I find interesting or the things I think my audience might find interesting and bring them. And if you say, well, why don't you ever talk about things that aren't controversial? I say, because I'm not that interested in them. If you say, well, the zoning commission came up with a new rule for how drain pipes come off houses, I say, you aren't going to hear me talking about that because it ain't interesting. Well, now that I work in this studio, I get up just before 6 o'clock, get cleaned up a bit, brush my teeth, comb my hair, and walk into the studio, and I start prepping, which means putting together, we call them the sheets, and they are one sheet for the Northwest, one sheet for the national show, and one sheet that's what I call the Northwest nonsense, which actually has an interesting story behind it too. I have 3 producers. One of them primarily screens phone calls, but also helps me assemble audio and that sort of thing. I have one producer, Mackenzie, and she primarily works on the national show, and she works remotely. And then I have Donovan, who's the executive producer, who oversees the whole mess, and then also works primarily on the Northwest show. He also schedules interviews, and we make him the keeper of the schedule, so that if I say, hey, I want to book this person, if I book interviews and then Donovan books interviews, invariably we will book them into the same time slot, which is not a good way to do a radio show. And we work on these sheets where all of us are working on the sheet and adding things and subtracting things at the same time, but because of the Google Docs that we use, not that crazy about Google politically, but the Google Doc works. As we make the changes, everybody sees the changes that are made simultaneously, no matter where we are. And so we prep, I do some call-ins. I do a live commentary for KXL every morning at 7:50. I do a call-in to my Seattle affiliate every morning. I talk to my Boise affiliate. I talk to affiliates in Mississippi and California and other places on regularly scheduled, talking to them on the phone or talking to them down the mic. And I cross-promote my show on their station. And then at noon, I start the Northwest show. And the Northwest show, as I said, is going out to 23 or 24 stations around Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And we do that. I do that show till 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, kind of mentally shift, go to the sheet that's the national sheet, and we start doing the national show. And so my producers, I think, are great producers, and I work with them, and we view this as a collaborative effort. It's not me sitting here in my studio saying, this is how it's going to be. Nobody wants that kind of stuff. We put together a great show, and in many cases, I can say, I need someone on this subject, say baby formula, or the cost of gasoline, and I trust that my producers know who to call that we may have used before to talk about those kinds of subjects. So all of that goes together, and then the show goes till 6 o'clock at night. So my day basically goes 6 to 6 every day. Well, in the last 6 years, I got diabetes, so I've lost about 60 pounds, and I'm happy about that. How have I changed as far as attitudes? I haven't changed at all. And one of the interesting phenomena that I could point out is that when I worked in television news and radio news, as I said, I didn't put my opinion in. And when I went on radio, I had people saying, well, you've become very conservative. And I said, I was always conservative. And they said, no, you weren't. You were on television, because they perceive everybody on television news to be liberal. And I said, no, I never put my opinion in, and you can't find my opinion in there. And so there was a perception, if you're in media, you're probably a liberal. And if all of a sudden you start talking conservative, then you must have changed. No, the fact is, I kept my opinions out. When I went on radio and began doing opinion journalism, which again, I've had people say, well, you're just an entertainer. Actually, I take that as a compliment. If my show isn't entertaining, why would anybody listen to it? But what I'm doing is the most traditional form of American journalism. I mean, if you go back to Tom Paine and Common Sense, that was about opinion. And most of what was journalism, even a couple of hundred years ago, was people's opinions. The reason they called it journalism is somebody typically was taking a journal. There was a guy named Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian guy, and he kept a journal. Do you know where his name ended up? It's the name of our country. Amerigo Vespucci is where that name came from, because he would travel on ships and write about his experiences in the Americas, and it became the name of the United States of America. But believe me, he was writing his opinion. And so I think opinion journalism is important because it sets things in context. If I say, well, gas prices have hit this level, a record high for America, $4.37 a gallon for a gallon of gas average nationwide, you say, but what does that number mean? Well, you have to put it in some context. You have to say it was half of that a year ago. Well, why did it go higher? Well, that's where you get into opinion. If you listen to the opinion of a guy named Joe Biden, he would say, well, Vladimir Putin did it to us with his war. And you say, the war started in February, the gas prices started going up in July of last year. I think you did this. And see, putting those pieces of opinion in, and sometimes juxtaposing two facts. You can make an opinion piece by just putting two facts together. Here's two facts for you. 40% of the most popular baby formulas in America are listed as out of stock, unavailable. Moms are at the stores going from store to store trying to find baby formula for a baby who can't wait and can't be switched over to something else in the meantime. Take that fact and put it next to this fact. The United States government under Joe Biden has invited millions of illegals to come into our country. Many of them have small children, including babies, and our government has been shipping pallets of baby formula to the border to give away to illegal aliens who should not be in our country, while American moms are going to stores and finding the shelves bare. Now, if you put those two facts next to each other, in most cases, people could say, well, that's outrageous. They say, if I add my opinion in, I would say, yes, it is outrageous. It shouldn't be happening. That's putting those facts in context. And if you don't have the context, just simple data like $4.37 a gallon or the most popular baby formula is unavailable, those facts don't necessarily mean something to people. I'll put another fact in there. 3 months ago, the biggest single baby formula factory in America, run by Abbott Labs in Sturgis, Michigan, was shut down. The FDA suspected, and the company did too, that 2 babies who got very sick and had died because of the formula. That was 3 months ago. They did an investigation. They determined the baby formula factory was not at fault. There's nothing wrong with the factory. Today, that factory is still shut down. And if you said, well, Lars, why is the biggest baby formula factory in America shut down when American moms are going to the store and finding the shelves bare? You say, exactly, because the FDA, a government bureaucracy, has said it may not open till we say it opens. Now, these are the same people at the FDA and the CDC who came out and said, masks don't do any good. Masks do lots of good. Nobody should wear masks. Everybody should wear masks. Take the jab, don't take the jab. If you listen to Joe Biden in the fall of 2020, he said, who would take that vaccine? Are you going to take it? He said disparagingly, right? A few months later, he's out saying the vaccine is the greatest thing and I created it and made it available for Americans. And you say, put those two facts together. What's the context? I think that's the best way to do radio, is when you try to be fake. If you say, well, I'm Lars Larson, but then in real life you sound completely different. Or I know there are people in my business, Alex Jones is one of them, who make up stuff. And they say stuff they don't believe is true. And they say they believe in things they don't actually believe in because they think it's more entertaining. Frankly, I couldn't do that. I just mentally and morally could not do that. That's number one. But number two, that's acting. And I don't do acting. I just tell people what I think. And I hope I do it in an interesting way because you do want the show to be entertaining. And I think what bothers people is they say, well, gosh, do you actually believe all this? Yes, I do. And if somebody comes, well, what if somebody comes to you with a really good argument and really good evidence? I said, I've changed my mind on things before. I've changed my perspective on things before. I'll say things about farming, and I know a lot of farmers, and occasionally I'll have a farmer or a logger or an engineer call and say, hey, Lars, that really isn't true. And I said, well, tell me. I want to know it. So that, and that's how you give people that listen to the show what you really believe, what you really think you can substantiate. And if you try to start being a fake, it doesn't work. You notice that I have a picture of my granddaughter right over there. And one of the first things I learned from a great general manager of the first radio station I worked for, his name was spelled Larson, but it was spelled E-N, not O-N, the way God intended. And he said, listen, we don't want people who are announcers. We want people who talk to people. And he says one of the things you can do is take a picture of your girlfriend or your mom or somebody you care about. And if you have to, stick it to the little board in front of you and talk to that person. If you want to tell them about the weather or the traffic or the news of the day or the ball game, tell it to that person the way you would if you were in person. And that makes perfect sense. I actually don't, because what had happened was I was expecting to start doing the full-time show in 90 days, and instead they called me on a Monday night and said, you're starting tomorrow, if you can. And I said, okay. And I'd had that experience before because filling in for Bill Gallagher, I'd get a call. Sometimes I got a call as late as 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning saying, can you come in and fill in for Bill? He's ill. And I would have a couple of hours to come in. So I did what I did as a reporter. I looked at the newspaper back in those days, no internet to speak of, and I picked some stories that I thought were worth talking about, and I just talked about them and took phone calls. So I actually don't remember, and as far as I know, there's no record of those first shows because, and in fact, the first night I did the national show for my current syndicator, Peter Kosan, who I've been working with for over a decade, we had Bill Cosby on the show that night. Now, this was before the indictment, before the trial and all that. And that one is lost as well, unfortunately. But it's been fun over the years. I've had a chance. One of the greatest pleasures I have is I get a chance to talk to some really interesting people. And you might think, well, those would be presidents and senators and ambassadors. I say, no, the most interesting people in the world don't tend to have a title in front of their name unless it's farmer or logger or retailer or business person or mom or dad. Those are the most interesting people in the world. So tell me one of those. I want to tell my listeners that I love them. I mean, I absolutely love my listeners because they tolerate me. There are things I talk about that make them happy. There are also things that I talk about that make my listeners angry. But they're tolerant of the idea that they think I will bring to them things that are interesting. And it's one of the reasons I called it honestly provocative talk. I want to provoke people to think. Now, they may be provoked to think, that Lars, he's an idiot. I can't believe he believes in that stuff. But if I can explain how I got to that point, how I arrived at that conclusion, I've had a number of people call me and say, I don't always agree with you, but I agree. I like the fact that you tell us how you got to the point where you're thinking the way you are, even if I still disagree with you. And I absolutely